Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to the second day of the wonderful Reading for Pleasure conference. My name is Hagop and I am the host of the day. Now, earlier this morning, we had such a beautiful panel discussion about reading and reading environment. If you weren't here, which means you missed it. For now, for the second panel discussion, parental impact, parent versus iPad. Is it worth the fight? We look at how technology, the internet, and AI are influencing our children and discuss, are we fighting a losing battle? How can we encourage our children to put down the device and pick up a book? And here on the stage, we have the panelists, starting with Dr. Nadia Taysir Dabbagh, Head of Department at the Mental Health Center of Excellence Al Jalila Children's Specialty Hospital. Ebtisam Al Beiti, Children's Author. Sandy Qarmout, Project Manager at the Queen Rania Foundation, Jordan. And our moderator of this session, Dr. Yusra Muzuki, Provost of the University of Birmingham, Dubai. Over to you, Dr. Yusra. Thank you.
Very much. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here on a Sunday morning. I think that's an indicator of the importance of the session and the topics of this whole amazing conference. I mean, I have to say, just the title, Reading for Pleasure, in itself kind of sets you back in terms of thinking, well, when did we read for pleasure last? What are we doing around this area? So thank you very much to Isabel for inviting me, and for, it's a privilege to be able to moderate the session today. But I am very privileged to have three amazing ladies. I have to let you in on a secret, actually. We spent about 45 minutes earlier talking in the green room, preparing for this. And I think that was such an interesting and engaging session. I hope we'll get a flavor of that as we discuss a bit more. But I am going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves and give us a little bit more of a flavor of what they've been doing and how this relates to today's conference or today's panel. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Nadia, if you don't mind.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much. So as mentioned, I'm a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist, head of department at Al Jalila Children's Hospital, which is a government entity. And I suppose the things to sort of bring to here is that I've worked for almost 14 years in the clinical field, so busy hospital practice. So there's the clinical angle. I was also program leader for Dubai's mental health strategy, and more recently in 2022, led on the national strategy for Palestinian children mental health. But part of that was looking at developmental years and what are the things that we can be doing to really get the best out of our children.
Very relevant experience there. Thank you very much. Sandy, can I go over to you?
So hi, everyone, and thanks for having me again. As mentioned, I'm a projects and programs manager at Queen Rania Foundation in Jordan. And I'm here because I manage programs that link to literacy development in general. And we're targeting early years, we're targeting school time, and we're basically having lots of programs at the moment targeting parents directly or indirectly to just encourage them to read to their kids. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more.
So much. Thank you. Ebtisam, over to you.
Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Ebtisam Al Beiti, and I am a children's author and early years professional. I started off my career as a teacher in a nursery, and went on also to developing curriculums in nurseries in Dubai and also managing nurseries. So today, I'm going to give it a little bit of a twist, and I'm going to be talking about the direct impact on our topic today on specifically within educators and how technology has affected teaching strategies, and is it a useful tool in classrooms. So I'm going to be talking a lot about also firsthand experience that I've experienced as well.
Thank you. I mean, I think that's a great place to start, if you don't mind. I'm going to start with you, Ebtisam, and just ask, maybe you can give us a little bit of an overview of how technology has impacted, or if maybe I'm making an assumption, how has technology impacted children in general, but particularly early years, given your own experience in that field?
So just to explain it a little bit further. So within the early years framework, so the EYFS, technology was always actually part of the curriculum, where children, one of their milestones was to understand technology. But over here, I want to talk about this. What does technology mean in an early years setting? And within early years, we look at more the cause effect, of technology. So within early years, so you've got children between 0 to 5. And if I'm talking about a classroom with toddlers, such as the 1-year-old, in technology here, we mean that what's the first child's, impression of technology? It could be through that toy where they press a button and a light pops up. Now, this is technology within early years. But then, of course, with technological advancements, there's been a lot of screen time. And I was telling my panelists today that in 2021, technology was actually removed from the curriculum. But now there is an ongoing debate with educators saying, was it the right choice? Now, for me personally, since the time I started teaching, I've always had, technology in my class. But as we were talking about, as an educator, it's a more of a controlled environment. So you get to choose, how am I going to introduce technology? And for me, honestly, because I was in control of it and I could choose, whether we're going to use it here or no, and I've given children that choice, it worked really, really well, especially with including all the children in my class. So I had children, of additional needs as well. And because of technological devices, I was able to include every child. So, for example, if there was a child, with limited, abilities of movement, and the child wasn't able to hold a pencil or wasn't able to turn a page, the use of a technological advice helped that child be included within the lesson. So, for example, when all the other children were learning how to write, that child had an iPad and was also learning how to write, his or her name, but just using his finger. So, in that sense, I would say yes for technology because it allowed children to be part of your lesson as well.
But arguably, the use of technology in that, environment, you called it controlled. I would also add it structured.
Yes.
You have a purpose for the use of technology. I guess the challenge comes when it is a free-for-all. There's a device, go away and entertain yourself. And maybe, Sandy, you can tell us a little bit more about, the work that you're doing with the Learning and Teaching Toolkit program and how that's panning out and some of the maybe motivations behind it.
Sure. Maybe I'll build on that. We definitely believe that technology could offer educational resources as well. The thing is, with excessive use of screen time and how early screen time is introduced to kids. So the American Pediatric Association states clearly before 2, no screen time, and after 2, just controlled maximum 1 hour a day. And that's including all screen outlets, But definitely at Queen Rania Foundation, we know that technology adds up to the educational gains. So we develop apps, educational apps. So we know that parents are already giving screen time to their kids. So we're trying to at least provide better options of screen time, educational apps on mathematics, literacy, learning about the world around us, but clearly stating the limits of time, the control measures that needs to be put. And here we need to focus on the controlled use of internet, with supervision of parents or supervision of teachers. So that's one thing. But on the teaching and learning toolkit, maybe you've asked about that in specific. So that's a different kind of platform, a unique kind of platform targeting educators in general, from policy making levels to teachers in the classrooms, to help them make decisions on how to utilize their time and select strategies based on evidence. So it's a place where there's a summary of evidence, global and regional, and people can go there, check 30 different approaches and figure out which one has the best impact on learning outcomes, which one has the less cost to be implemented, and how much evidence is about it. So that's the teaching and learning toolkit. But
I'm interested, actually. You mentioned policymakers, and that tends to be an entity or a set of stakeholders that's relatively absent from the discussion on, protecting children, I guess, in terms of the use of technology. How are you managing that? I mean, how can you protect, I guess, or how can you mandate what can and can't be done within a home environment, within a school environment through policy? Is that a direction of travel we will need to take at some point?
I think we need to advocate for the controlled use of technology. What we can do is like always disseminating these evidence-based findings to policymakers, informing them about what's evidence saying, trying to advocate and like place statements and events and raising the bar to policy change about this stuff, definitely. But yeah, the toolkit is one way of doing that. But definitely there's also practical ways. So sometimes you need to go bottom up, So you need the parents, the teachers to adopt these and understand these things first, and that would like build the momentum upwards. So either or. But yeah, the toolkit has also like one approach which is about the parental engagement. So the parental engagement is a guide that we have developed targeting the schools. So through schools, we're trying to involve parents more often. So it's providing teachers and educators with recommendations about how to engage parents effectively in supporting their child's literacy learning in specific. And we've piloted that in Jordan, like in 84 schools, and I'll be speaking about it later in the afternoon. But yeah, I don't want to burn it all, but it's so important to just raise the awareness of parents on how they can support their child's literacy development. And the biggest thing they can do is reading to their child from the early years and reading with their child when they're a little bit older.
We'll come back to the role of parents in a minute, but I think it's important that we kind of try and close the loop and come to you, Nadia, with a little bit more about, what have you seen in your role, an extensive experience in kind of mental health, and how is that impacting? What's the data telling us, and what's happening in that space?
Yes, and I'm sitting here feeling I'm a little bit sitting here as a harbinger of doom a little bit, and sort of bearing in mind that I'm working in a children's hospital. I will see the most extreme cases, so perhaps my view of the world is distorted. I hold my hands up to that bias, but we are seeing, and it's been exacerbated by COVID, so many children under the age of 5 or 6 that don't know how to speak and don't know how to relate. And you can see this is directly connected to the amount of screen time. The thing that's really important about us as human beings is that our human brains can only develop with another human brain. And we can't give that task up to devices at that early stages. Even AI. I mean, look, there's many roles for it, but I suppose my message I wanted to get across is those early years. That's when you set the scene, and the evidence is coming out, those first 5 years. And if you think that our children are the most important investment for us as parents, as society, what are we doing with our children? And I think it's really asking ourselves our question, what are we doing in terms of how are we helping them to learn how to speak, how to develop relationships, how to communicate, how to attach? We know when you look at these examples of people who've done incredibly well in very difficult circumstances, the thing that makes the difference is that they've had a really secure attachment figure. And that doesn't develop through a device, that develops through a connection. And it was interesting, one of the conversations we were having before coming on was about difficulties that people had had. And it was particularly the role of the mother or the role of the parent who believed in them and pushed them through to achieve wonderful things. So I think that early years, I think we really need to be thinking about. And the other group that I think is really important, and I sort of really wanted to get across today, is the 10 to 14-year-olds. This is the group that we really need to be thinking about. They haven't got developmentally the ability to filter out, and their drive is to be a part of the group. Now, when you open up that group to mean that you're now comparing yourself with celebrities and models and footballers and all these things, it's a lot for a 10 to 14-year-old to deal with. So what we're seeing in our hospital, in our emergency room, we're seeing a lot of self-harm, a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, because kids are just feeling like overwhelmed by what their expectations are. And so I think those are the two groups that I feel particularly concerned about.
Nadia, it's so interesting. And you set that against, all you have to do is walk around anywhere. You walk into a mall or whatever, and you see little babies in prams with, some sort of iPad or some device. They're not even absorbing the world around them. You see families in a restaurant, and kids are on their devices. They're not discussing, kids and parents, they're not on their devices. Where's the issue? Is it an awareness issue? Is it an easy out? Is it an easy option out? I mean, what's happening here? Why are we in this place?
I was having a chat with my teenage daughter yesterday. She said, Mum, it's about dopamine. And I said, oh, you're right. It is. We're in a big competition for dopamine. We're in a competition of what's more appealing. And we all are guilty of it ourselves. It's much easier to hand your baby or to hand your child a device than it is to actually, anyone who's spent, a day with a small toddler, how many questions do you have to answer? How many things do you have to, how many emotional disturbances do you have to sort of, it's full on work, and you get to the end of the day and you think, oh, I've done my job. But that's important work, because what we're teaching children is, how do you manage with difficult emotions? So I really do, how do you manage a tricky family dinner when people have different, different opinions, etc. It's tough work. It's tough emotional work. But that's important work, because we're teaching people, how do you manage difficult emotions? How do you convey opinions? How do you resolve conflict? And in the world we're living in, we really need those skills. So I suppose that the answer is, in a way, I understand it's much easier, but we need to really get back on task and say it's a really important task we've got to do.
So if I take that then back to you, Ebtisam, as an author, as somebody who is closely engaged with that part of the population, how do we use writing? How do we use books to bring the children back into a place where they feel? I mean, think of today's conference, reading for pleasure. How can books be used in a way that paints them as something interesting to do, something appealing to do, possibly even something cool to do, to read a book? I mean, what's happening in that space?
I think I'm going to elaborate on what Nadia has just said. It starts with us, first of all. It's our self-awareness. And I always say this, when I give talks to parents, to educators as well, especially within that early year stage, it is what is important for you. Actually, I gave a workshop the other day to some parents, just simply, how do you read a story to a child, So it starts off with you. If you're enthusiastic about reading that story, if you're excited to say, look what our story is about today, it's about a rooster, that child is going to want to do it. So we are their role models. What we say goes. So if we start with ourselves and then we transmit that to the children, because even with books, I'm coming back to, technology within books. Technology would actually just be neutral. It's how we would, transmit it to the children. And as we were discussing earlier, in story time, I used to actually, in my class, give the children a choice. I used to say, for today's story time, would you like to listen to an audiobook or a story on the tablet? Or would you like to listen to a Miss Sam? So they called me Miss Sam. Or would you like to listen to a Miss Sam story? And I think by giving children that choice, they will then, be empowered. And 90% they would say, we want to listen to a Miss Sam story, only because they see that I'm super excited to read to them. And, within books as well, the children see reflections of themselves. We talk about it. And even if you're reading a story from a tablet, it's not actually it's the conversation that happens around the book. So let's say I am using a tablet to read a book. It's not the tablet that's the issue. It's, are you then going the extra step to talk to the children, to ask questions, and I had a lot of fun, reading these stories with tablets. But then I would put it down and say, how did that make you feel? Did you have a similar experience? And this is also what I talked about in my workshop. It's not the actual book. It's the conversations around it. Are the children participating? And I know, Nadia, you touched base on that as well. Children don't learn just by absorbing from a tablet. Are they learning to converse? So it's at the end of the day, and I always say that it comes down to us, be it educators, as teachers, as parents. It starts with our self-awareness. So I think we need to start, doing more workshops for parents and educators, to tackle this.
I must tell the audience a little secret that you can't tell anyone. We had a bit of a disagreement earlier this morning about do we encourage or do we encourage parents to use a tablet to read as a vehicle to getting kids hooked into reading. And I'm not going to declare any interest there, but we had two camps. We were thinking about, well, no, we should really take the device away completely and just focus on the physical. You can tell I'm of the older generation. I quite like this, having written by hand. But then there is is it fair on the children to expect them to completely disengage with something that is everywhere around us? So maybe we use the tablet as a platform to read. And that's just a thought, I guess. It'll be interesting to see what the audience, maybe we can talk about it later, but whether we think, no, we should stick to the paper version of the books, or whether it's the technology, as Nadia, as Ebtisam just said, as a device to aid, to get us to a learning.
And I think it's important, sorry to cut you, I think it's important also to stop making it a taboo subject, because it's not either or. It's not an either or. You give them that choice and then they decide.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So maybe, Sandy, I know you've done a lot of work in this space, and maybe you can share a little bit about that as well.
Maybe I would talk a little bit about the book, because also in Queen Rania Foundation, we believe about what bond the book could create between the parents and the kids, the teachers and the kids. And in a very strategic long-term program we're running at the moment called Iqra'li, which means read to me, in the voice of a child telling his parent, just read to me. We're targeting parents of birth to 5 years or years old kids. Just raising the awareness that these kids are not too young to be read to in the first place. In Jordan, less than 3% read to kids 0 to 2. And that's really too little. And mostly because they think it's way too early. That's one thing. So we need definitely to raise the awareness on that. But we also need to work on removing the barriers and focusing on their motivators. And when we did the study about what motivates parents, the things that resonate to them is the bond and the quality time they would spend and the peace of mind that they will have with their kids. So we're trying to just show them what kind of bond you would build with your kid when you're reading a book. And we're mainly sharing 3 main strategies during reading that would make the reading more engaging and more interesting for the kids and for the parents, and would guarantee that bond to happen. And these main 3 simple strategies are: ask questions while reading. So the questions could vary from very easy, close-ended questions to younger babies, and then to toddlers, more open-ended questions that would trigger some thinking, some critical thinking, some debating ideas together and things like that. That's one strategy. The second strategy is serve and return strategy. And this is about how the parent who's reading or the teacher who's reading needs to grasp the reactions of the baby, on which picture he's pointing at, or what sounds, babblings he's making on a certain page, and then expand on that, maybe describe it, make sounds, voices about it, and take that reaction and see what interests more. Don't flip the page if the baby is still interested in that page. You don't need to finish the book today, it's fine. You just need to grab the attention of your baby and keep him interested. If it's only 1-2 pages, it's fine. It's just he's having a good time with you, just use it. So that's the second strategy. And the third strategy is about relating to the real world. So relating the books to the real world and vice versa. So you're walking in a street, you see a cat, you see that cat, it reminded me of the cat we've read about, Tom, in that story, and you start a conversation about it. You're like in the home and you're like, for example, brushing your teeth, and you can link to a book that you've read earlier about teeth brushing and things like that. So that's the third strategy. And that's what could tell the child that books are not something like abstract. They really relate to our own world. They could teach us something and like build.
I'm going to go a little bit off piste because we didn't discuss this earlier, but one of the challenges I think we have, particularly in the Arab world, is that books are so related or so linked to education in terms of structured, examined pieces of work that are not necessarily seen as a form of pleasure or even interesting. The books that are used in the curriculum may not be the most exciting. Children at schools, at public schools, are not given books for pleasure to read on a regular basis at an early age. So I think there's a lot more work to be done from a different angle as well. Yes, we're asking parents to read, and we've got a generation of parents who understand the importance of this, but also it is the same generation that is challenged, that is mother is out to work more so than maybe a previous generation. So how are we looking? I mean, this is an open question. How are we looking to addressing that? Because we've got quite a challenging set of factors and dimensions here that simply, and I'm not trying to boil it down to its simplest terms, but simply saying, look, if you read to your child, 5 minutes every. I used to try and read to the kids at night. My kids are a bit older now, but I used to try and read. And it's after a very long day, and I used to flip. My husband will know this. I used to skip pages. That's just to the end of the story. Come on. I mean, do you know what I mean? So really practically, how can we remove this idea that reading is linked to schoolwork, which is not necessarily the most pleasurable of activities?
I think starting early is key. So that's one thing, because when you're starting with a baby of 1 month old, 2 months old, you'll never think of schooling. So your selection of books would be different. It would be based on the interests of the baby. And if you start that early, you'll build the habit of reading. And the habit doesn't require much. It requires like daily 2, 5, 10 minutes, whatever time, but just a daily practice of reading and seeing these reactions. Okay, I have to mention that story. We have been video shooting some videos with real parents, for the campaign, for the Iqra' Li campaign. And we insisted on shooting with real parents, not like actors or something, because we wanted the videos to show that bond and how people's real reactions with their babies while reading a book. And with all the parents we've shooted, except one family, they have been they never touched a book with their baby before. And I'm talking babies, but it's actually birth to 5, okay? So most of these parents during the shooting were themselves astonished. Wow, my baby is looking, he's following the eyes, he's so interested and he's babbling, he's happy. The parents themselves were shocked. And I think if we just get the parents to start that activity early on, we'd build the love and habit for reading, and we'll disconnect it from only the educational side of it. And it becomes reading for pleasure. Also the books. We need to be smart about the selection of books and encourage very creative multimedia kind of books to compete with the technology. The dopamine you've mentioned. We want to have it in our books as well. So we want to find really nice illustrations, maybe pop-ups for the younger ones, things that they can flap, swap, all of that kind of interaction with the book is really interesting for the kids as well.
Nadia, I wanted to ask you about once somebody is presented at the clinic or you've established, how are parents deal? I mean, what is the role that then parents are playing, schools are playing, educators are playing? How is that being developed so that it does raise awareness? Is that something that you're involved in, or?
Well, what I would say is it's a really hard job by the time they've got to me. So what I would say is the key message is prevention is always better than the cure. So, by the time they're coming to me, it's a big piece of work where we're having to look at lots of different issues and figure out where we go next. You start habits early, and, we go back to dopamine, we go back to pleasure. Once the parents are enjoying it, the children are enjoying it, once they see reading as something, as a way to bond and connect with your child and for the child to attach, I suppose that's the key message I wanted to get across. Reading for pleasure is a way to build those attachments and build those connections, and to enjoy learning. And the biggest thing is kids will do whatever is pleasurable. So if they enjoy learning and they're curious and you set that kid up by the age of 5, they're going to do fine at school. I think that's the message to get across, is that put that effort in those first 5 years, get them interested in reading, get them connected, and the rest is honestly really quite easy. And the statistic I think that always sort of shocks me, I'm sure you're familiar with the work on the word gap, between, if the educators probably are aware of this, but by 18 months of age, you can already see the difference between high socioeconomic families, status families, and low. And by the time they get to 5 years, so this is before kids have even got into proper school, it's called a 30 million word gap between the more well-off and the less well-off. What are we doing about that? And I suppose that's where books come in. Set the habits, get your kids all off to school with the same advantages.
And the 80% brain development in the first 3 years is like crazy. 80% of the brain is there by 3. So what you've put by 3 is there, and that's something we need to just...
I want to add here as well. One of the most simple way of doing this is just giving them access to books, making sure that they've got their library at home, making sure that they can freely go and choose. Sometimes we see parents who keep their books maybe on a high shelf, so they are not in control of their reading for pleasure, but rather you would put all the books, on a lower shelf where they freely, like their toys, they have free access to their toys, give them also free access to their books, as well. So make sure to have their shelves also where they can have that free access. So if they choose to hold that book, then they can, and they're doing it for their pleasure as well.
Can I just make one point on that? It's that the sort of typical scenario, I'd say, is that family come in and they say, my child doesn't read or write. And then when you explore a little bit more, you realize that the only exposure they've had to reading and writing has been schoolwork. And it's usually they show me the schoolwork. And honestly, I don't know if anybody could be really very appealing. I mean, there's sort of worksheets that look so boring. Yeah. I don't think any child is going to sort of want to do that. But if the child before this has lived in an enriched home where there are books, where they've done these sort of problems or reading and these kind of things, then they might be interested in the worksheet. But if you haven't got that and you're giving them boring worksheets, the two things together, because reading is an active process. I think that's a key message. Reading is not a passive. It's why do kids love the iPad? Because it's sort of passive. You can just watch it and you get the stimulation. Reading actually requires quite a lot of cognitive work. You need to sustain attention. You need to follow things through. You have to remember the character from before. What's he then doing? What's the plot? But that's why reading is so important. It's building your brain. It's like going to the gym, right? And so we have to make it really appealing and get the habits in early and practice. Every day there should be a little bit of reading to get their brain
also
sticking.
Not to pressurize them. I know myself in primary school, my worst thing to do was to do a book review. Like after reading a book, we were handed this worksheet and the title was book review. And I hated it. I hated it because it suddenly became academic. It was suddenly like an exam. I was thinking, is this the right answer? Is it the wrong answer? So it's to remove all that expectation from it.
And you're absolutely right. I mean, I agree with everything. Nadia, earlier when we were talking, you said it's the battle between being bored. It's battle between bored and book, right? And I guess for my generation, you either read a book or you twiddled your thumbs. There wasn't much else. I'm of the Atari generation, if anybody remembers the Atari. So it was that, that was the first kind of idea of anything that you played with. So do we need to move back a little and get kids a little bit more bored? Is that where we want to go? Do we need to keep them so stimulated so much of the time? What is that doing to their brains as well?
Well, thank you for raising that point, because I'm actually a great believer in boredom. And there's quite a lot of research coming out about how actually it's okay for kids, and actually kids that are allowed to get a little bit bored, that's when they start sparking their imagination. That's when they start thinking about things. That's when they get creative. So I think, particularly in Dubai, we do a lot of entertainer parenting. Our kids have to be happy all the time, and they have to be busy and engaged in all of these things. But I think there's a balance to it. Sometimes entertain, but sometimes, you can be a bit bored. There's some books if you want to lessen the boredom. But I don't think kids need to be entertained continuously, because you see, when you have an option, kids are always weighing up the options. If I have boredom versus book, I'll go for the book. If I have book versus 100 other really interesting other things that I can do on my iPad, it's natural. They'll go for the iPad. So I'm a great advocate for boredom.
I'm glad. We're not far off time, but there is another kind of area that I think we do need to address, and we need to name the elephant in the room, if you like. We've been talking about, for the last hour, we've been talking about, children and the challenges of managing, their diet of technology and devices, etc. And this is all very important. But I think we have to also appreciate and admit that it's not them out there that we have to sort out. There is a lot of it that is here. I mean, we are also possibly guilty of overdose and a little bit too much technology at times. Nadia's smiling. But I mean, what can we be thinking about? And again, an open question. What can we be thinking about in terms of role modeling, in terms of raising awareness, in terms of managing ourselves? What message do we need to be taking back as parents, as educators, as parts of global citizens, if you like? What do we need to be thinking about so that for this next generation we're able to handle some of that challenge? And if you don't mind, I'll start with you, Ebtisam, and then we'll pick up.
I think it's basically just being aware of yourself first, just having that self-awareness, and just believing that our device is just a tool. It's a tool possibly for work, for you're telling your child you're using it to reply maybe to emails, to do this and to do that, and not to make them feel that, that this is the problem here. You don't want to be in that problem. So I think it starts with ourselves first, for self-awareness as well. And it's teaching the child that it's okay, to use it for certain things, but not for everything. For example, if they want to, if they want to just play games on it, but you can tell them you can play one game, but you can give them a choice of playing something else as well. So first of all, giving them a choice, and also just explaining that, technology is neutral, but how we're using it, and it's used as a tool, but not instead of. It's not we're using this instead of this. So I think that would be, one way of possibly like showing them, and just to be aware when you're around young children that you're not on it the whole time, but you're with them, you're present at the moment as well.
I heard a really good saying once, I'm sure you've heard it, children should have the best of you, not the rest of you.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because when you're on a device, they're not getting the best of you, they're getting the remainder of, So Sandy, what do you think?
Yeah. So, like you see it a lot when people want to like punish their kids for something. They would say like, I'll take the phone, or no screen time today or something. And I think that's bad. What's like forbidden is really the most wanted. And I think we need to be smartly using the other way around. Like if you want to punish, and I'm not like into punishing a lot, by the way, in principle, but I mean, just like there's no book today. You will lose your reading time today. So let's start to make them see how precious it is for them that they will lose that opportunity. That's one thing. If we're gifting kids something for birthdays, let's start gifting books. That conveys the message, how book is precious, how book is special, how it's for pleasure. It's for entertainment in one way or another.
Yeah, that's so true. Nadia?
So I think the main thing has been around connecting through reading, the pleasure of reading. And I suppose the bigger message is around setting the scene, thinking ahead. It's much easier to have a child working towards. So even things like, well, if you're reading well and so on, and you're spending, you can then give, the phone, for example. This is one example. It's much easier to give something as a reward, but when you give the phone, for example, that you set very clear boundaries around it. So one thing is that we know from the research, nighttime sleep for kids, particularly those 10 to 14-year-olds, is critical. No child should have their phone in their room at night. Now, the thing is, if you've given the phone with that clear message, it's fine because you've set the scene. It's like good management. The problem is once you've just handed over these devices without any restrictions, any rules, any boundaries, trying to take that phone away from the child, honestly, they'll attempt suicide. I've seen it because it's just that they have then become so connected. You're taking it away. It's like you're taking away their life. So I suppose it's about thinking before you just, I think we will look back on this time. I think we'll look back on this time and think, what were we doing at home? I think at school it's been much more thought out. But at home, what were we doing? Just handing things out with access to all of this without really thinking it through.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I shared this with Isabel before, but I'm a great fan of some of those apps that manage that conversation. And it avoids you having to have the conversation every time you take the device away, because it gives ownership as well for the child. Probably need to do it when they're a bit older, maybe the 10 to 14s, but I used to use one with my own son, and it was paired with my phone so I could control it. But, we'd have a conversation about what times do you think you can, dedicate to this? And we'd agree Sundays it would be this, Mondays it's this. And then the device just switches off automatically, and it removes that sense of I'm taking it off you, and moves you into a space where it's something we've agreed, something we're doing together, which I think is probably a better place.
From the fight.
Saves me from the fight, and also it saves me from the temptation of, let him just stay on it, I'm too tired. Which is also a recognition of some of the challenge. I'm going to, we need to wrap up in a minute, but I'm going to ask each one of you very quickly in 1 minute, if we were having this panel in 5 years' time, what do you think we'd be discussing? Thinking ahead, you just said, that's what sparked me, by the way, Nadia. You've just said, we were going to look back and reflect and think what we'll be doing. If we were having this, and bearing in mind the rate, and the pace of change in technology and what's happening, and the AI that's coming in, and the over-reliance on technology for everything, what is going to be the state of books and reading, in your view, for this younger generation in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? I'm going to start with you as an author.
I think we would have to compromise. I think we would be discussing of how we have adapted now technology with books, because I think it will just be so widespread that we would be forced to have both, and it would be up to us to keep traditional books alive. So I think it would be it's our job to protect traditional books, not the kids' jobs. But if we do a good job of it, and maybe it's time, maybe it's a wake-up call for educators, for parents as well, to say this is an us problem now. And hopefully we'll be having a great conversation where we've come up with initiatives, like the Reading for Pleasure project, but I must say that, it's all not doom and gloom. I've seen it great in schools. They've got these amazing things. There's something called, I was telling you in the green room that there's something, I don't know if you know it, it's called DEAR, where it's drop everything and read, where schools at any point of the day, they put an alarm on, they say it's DEAR time, so drop everything and read. The whole school body, including principals, teachers, even if they're in meetings, they drop everything, everybody runs to a book, and they read as well. We've got initiatives now, there's the Elf Caravan as well, something exciting. A van it's like a nice, one of the kids in one of the schools when I was with the Reading for Pleasures, they said it's better than an ice cream van, because it's got books in it. So I do think we need to give ourselves a pat on the back because we are trying. We are really, really trying. And I think an important thing is also not to shame parents, that you didn't and it's your fault, because once you've shamed that parent would not want to come because they just feel that they've messed up with their kid. But I think instead we look at it in a kinder, more empathetic. And I'm going to share a story with you where I had a child in my class where both parents were working parents, you know, and not by any fault of their own. They needed the income. So this child was left a lot of the time to a device, and the parents knew. And, you know, he would listen to stories and everything on the iPad. This child had absorbed so much information that, we know, when the other children were learning to count to 20, he could count to 100. He knew every sea creature. You point at this one. He knew every train. He knew every color, you know, and other colors, you know, not just primary colors. Ask that child, you know, during circle time, but why are you feeling sad today? Nothing. He didn't say anything, you know, but who hurt you today? Nothing. So he had absorbed. Now, the way, you know, myself and the school principal approached this was with, you know, sensitivity, with kindness towards the parents. So we called the parents in, and instead of saying, you did this, he needs this, it was, would you like some help? You know, we've noticed these few things, we are on board. And even the principal and myself visited the child in his house, and we taught the parents, you know, how to work with him, how to introduce reading, how they can. And, you know, happy ending, he was brilliant by the end of the academic year. But it's just to address parents with kindness, with empathy, and not to shame them as well.
And I would say also there's the role for authors to play in creating the lovely books that the kids would be interested in.
Yeah.
Sandy, where are we going to be in 5 years' time?
I think we'll be looking for these kind of authors who create, whether like real books or app books, that are interesting, engaging for the children, including these kind of gamification features that attract the kids, but now just to focus on reading, to create that love for reading and the habit for reading. Sometimes you need to use the technology to grab the attention of the kids for reading. Sometimes it's the other way around. Each parent and educator would know how to tackle each situation, but in general, it's not either or, of course. But definitely we need to set the boundaries, and we need to know what books fits the child, what attracts them, what interests them, and what technology allowances for each age group is okay, and things like that. I'm not sure if I can look like in the future and see things. I hope, like, at least to raise the bar in our countries of parents reading to their kids from birth to 5. Like, so, yeah. Growing from 3% to 40 would be like a great success in 5 years. Yeah.
Thank you. And Nadia?
Well, I mean, having authors like Ebtisam and Sandy, the great work you're doing, I do feel inspired today. I suppose my concern is that the inequalities will get greater. So I think that, you know, everybody in this room, you know, you're probably going to do a great job, and there'll be lots of things. But it's really thinking, how do we get the message out to those parents who are working full time, who are really stretched? How do we reach them, I suppose? Because I think those are the ones that I'm worrying about in 5 years' time.
And I would agree. I think definitely for us as well in universities, I represent the University of Birmingham, Dubai here, and we're involved in the research that's taking part as part of this kind of Reading for Pleasure project. It is important that we continue to do the research and that we take that and feed that back into what we do more widely, because that's how we're going to continue to improve. I think you're absolutely right. It's not going to be we were here, we're there. It's a continuous process, but it does involve all different players here. So wonderful. Look, thank you so much, ladies. I could talk to you all morning, but we've taken up time from the audience, allocated time for questions, but I'm sure they will forgive us. Oh, we've got a question already. So sorry.
But I would like to say, you talked about the difference between physical books and books on iPads. So the brain is the most complex object in the known universe. There is so much we don't know about it. But what we do know is our senses. So when particularly young children have in their hands, and it doesn't stop with just young children, a book, it has a feel, it has a smell. They can put it in their mouth and chew it. They can turn the pages. There is so much interaction. And when a parent is reading to a child, the child in picture books will be looking a lot at the illustrations, the colours, and they will. I've noticed that over the years of reading so many children's stories to family and children in schools, how much they pick out of the pictures, which I never do. So because their brains are so absorbent. So I would stand up and say that a physical book is always better than a book on a tablet because of the senses and how our brains are wired. As human beings, we're wired to survive. So survival is why we have these senses. The taste, the smell, a sight, hearing are all really important. And I'm a very kinesthetic thing, so I touch everything. And books in particular. And when we read physical books, and this is on teenagers, adults, everyone, we read a physical book, we read it slightly slower than on an iPad, but we also comprehend and absorb memories longer. That's proven scientifically. And the latest book, if you haven't got it, get a copy of it. It's The Anxious Generation by Professor Jonathan Haidt. His name is not, he doesn't hate, it's not spelt that way, it's spelt in another weird way. But he said from 2009, there has been an epidemic of mental illness amongst young people. And there are he's identified through the research, 2 reasons. And you say not naming and shaming parents, I agree with you. It's parents' behaviours, how it's changed, but it is the advent of the iPhone, the smartphone, and all the gadgets that go with it, which are changing the development of children's brains. So they come into that age, suicidal thoughts, living in not a real world, not having conversations. When I think about home environment, I mean, the number of conversations I particularly have that I remember because they're near with grandchildren about death and heaven and things like that. Now, can you imagine if that child does not have a human being to sort of ask questions of or discuss things that are going through their minds? And it is in that moment where you look a child in the eye, you make that eye contact. Again, that's so important. So I'm just adding that to all you've said because I'm so concerned. And you go back 100 years to cigarettes when they used to be promoted with people in white coats saying cigarettes are good for you. We now, 100 years later, countries like New Zealand are raising the age every year, so cigarettes will become illegal eventually. Why? Because they're addictive. It's the addictive quality of cigarettes, the addictive dopamine quality of being a passive eater of social media. So I rest my case, sorry.
Thank you so much.
I'm sure there'll be lots of other speakers.
I think we've got a question from the lady there.
Thank you very much for this session. My name is Dr. Ghadir Al-Kindi and I'm from United Arab Emirates University. I just wanted to agree to what just said right now because I teach every semester from 100 to 200 students, every semester at college level. And you have no idea the amount of students struggling with anxiety, and particularly social anxiety is on the rise, in addition to other mental illness like depression and I think suicide thoughts. And when I ask these students, some of them would say, I don't know, I was fine. It just started after the pandemic. And it makes perfect sense because most of them were on their devices most of the time. But this is what I see. And I think definitely technology has the two, especially depressions. And I see some students are really struggling with depression. But the dark side of it is they are struggling with their parents to agree to take them for help because we are struggling here with religion and, mental illness as an illness. Yes, we know religion can relieve you sometimes if you have some anxieties, but sometimes you really need help in order for you to see how religion can help you. You need help, medically. So most of these students that I see really need help medically, but their parents will not allow them to go for help because they don't believe this. Oh, just read Quran. But I think, can you just discuss a little bit in order for me to read Quran and feel that it can help me? I need first some medication. So yeah, thank you very much for raising this question.
Yes, thank you very much. One more question. Do we have time?
Just a really quick comment on that is that it's, I suppose, as a child psychiatrist, you're looking at the child across the lifespan, and each part of development, you've got certain tasks that need to be done. You know, under the age of 5, you need to learn how to attach, you need to learn how to speak, you need how to form relationships. The thing for teenagers, what's so important, you need to learn how to be part of a group, how to deal with friendships, breakups with friendships, setbacks, challenges. All this stuff is the work. It is the work of being a teenager from the socio-emotional point of view. We focus on the academics, but that's the work. Now, if you've not let them do that work in their teenage years, they'll go off to university, they don't know. How do I deal with a setback? How do I deal with challenges? How do I deal with friendships? How do I deal with people being mean to me? They haven't done that job. So we're setting them off not knowing. Now, they could have learned some of this from reading, because what is reading? You're going into those worlds and you're becoming a part of it in a sustained way. You get to love or hate those characters and you go through those worlds. Say, oh, how did he manage that tricky situation, you know? So that's where I think the work to be done is the socio-emotional work. Yes, exactly.
Got a question over there. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, thank you so much for that session. That was really engaging and interesting. And I fully agree, I think, with the part that we need to engage parents as much as possible and destabilize that belief that these 5 minutes at the end of the day do make a difference, and especially in the foundational 0 to 5 years. So I'm really happy to see work, for example, that Queen Rania Foundation is doing in other places to work on that. But my area of interest is always Arabic as well, and working on the literacy and the interest in Arabic literature. And I think more of a call to action rather than a question is we need to make these books a lot more accessible to our children. There are a lot more quality Arabic books for children now than there was 10 years ago, but it's still a lot easier to find an English good book rather than an Arabic one. The techniques have changed, the publishing industry has changed, but maybe we need to involve all parties here. We need to work with parents, we need to work with schools, publishers, ministries to do a revolution to the whole world of Arabic literature for children, because yes, they are getting hooked on reading for pleasure. You can see that, of course, there's some statistics that's really disappointing, but there are children who are getting more into books these days, but sadly, the majority of them are leaning towards other languages, and I think we need to pay a lot of attention to that because the mother tongue is so important. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that point. Actually, in our national study in Jordan, 3 main barriers were facing the parents when we've asked them why you're not reading to your kid. So the first one is as I mentioned, they didn't know that reading is helpful or would benefit the child from that early age. But the second point was the access to books. They said there's no books, or we don't know which books actually suit our kids. And in Jordan, we actually really suffer from that. Except from Amman and the big cities in Jordan, you rarely can find interesting early years targeted books. And we definitely call for these creative authors, enrich our libraries with early years Arabic books. Mostly the ones who read, they read English books or other languages books, as you mentioned. Yeah.
I know we've got, I think, time for one more question. Is that correct? 2 more questions, but I just want to add one comment. I think one of the challenges as a parent was that I was living in the UK, I was trying get my kids to understand Arabic. The issue we have is our definition of a mother tongue, because the written Arabic book is written in classical Arabic a lot of the time, which has no resonance with our, dialectic, if you like, tongue that we used at home. And therefore, getting the child to understand became hard work. It became a lesson, We speak North African Arabic at home. I'm originally from Libya. So a lot of the words have no relation to what is written. And therefore, you spend 20 minutes trying to explain. And I think that there's got to be, I'm no expert in the field, but I do think there's got to be a lot more work to be done in terms of teaching Arabic as a second language, not as a primary language, because it is not the mother tongue. What we speak at home is not what is written in the book. Whereas in English, it's different. In English, what you're saying is what you're reading, and therefore it makes it easier. So just a comment as a user rather than anything. We'll take 2 questions because we're a little bit out of time, but lots more. Please.
Hello. Hi, good morning. My name is Elisa. I'm the school librarian from Safa British School. It's not really I have a question leading up to it, but it's a bit contradictory to the previous 2 questions that we had. I'd just like to elaborate on the paper versus device that you talked about earlier. I'm sure other school librarians and other educators agree with me on this, but technology will continue to evolve and it will continue to exist. So I guess that's up to us to continue to adapt and build strategies on how we can incorporate our students or children to encourage them to use it properly. And I think with enough adult supervision, it will be utilized properly. I don't want to see technology as something that's bad. I want to see it as something that we can use as a platform and something that can benefit us. And mental health issues were already existing even before technology exists. So I'm not saying it's completely reliant on that, but with enough adult supervision and help, I think it's something that we can use to encourage students to read for pleasure. And my question is, for libraries with limited budgets, do you have any ideas or any innovative programs that we can do to incorporate technology in our library programs? Of course, we do online reading, but other than that, what are the other things that we can do and we can use to incorporate technology in our in pushing the kids to read for pleasure?
I think one would be like what Sandy does is adapting also educational tools as well within your reading programs. You use them as tools to teach children, first of all, how to read, correct? And using and then you can use the physical books for the reading for pleasure. So maybe using technology as a tool, as a teaching tool that you use, to learn, phonics, and then you have your books as well. So that could be something, libraries could work on to have teaching tools, teaching apps as well in a technological,
and we mostly encourage the use of technology for the parent or the educator to transfer a knowledge, a message for them, to give them recommendation, guidance, but to actually help them read a normal book to a child at the end. That's the ultimate goal, of course. But on that as well, on the books, maybe we need to think of initiatives and programs that could provide books in a lower costs for those who suffer from access to books, not only but financial access to books, and in Jordan also books for kids quite expensive, usually the good ones, not less than $10 a piece, and that's for a normal family, that's a little bit an issue. So now in a Qara'li program, we're gifting books in complementary to other existing public services. So now we're gifting books when the parents are going to vaccination, for example. We're gifting books when parents are going and attending sessions at CBOs. We're gifting books with doctor visits, in schools, in different ways. So we're we've mapped what's there. People we're going to parents where they are. So the parents of birth to 5, we know they'll go for the vaccination. 94% of the kids are vaccinated, if not more. So we know we'll find them there. We've trained the nurses and the midwives who give the vaccinations on just sharing a message about the importance of reading, how to read, and the message changes for every vaccination appointment. And a book is gifted to the parent based on the age of the child. And to afford that, we, for example, had to de-spec the books, but really high quality books, high illustrations, high quality text, but we just de-spec slightly, maybe in size or in paper weight, just to afford it and to get a national distribution of books. That's one thing, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I'm conscious of time, but one of the things that you can think about is looking at taking kids on trips to other school libraries. We take kids to trips to malls and to theme parks and all that. You can look at collaborating with other schools, maybe in the area, maybe schools that have different sets of books and all that. And it becomes a nice thing to do. We're going on a trip where we're going to another library, and that in itself sends hopefully some positive messages. Final question, I think.
One suggestion, if we can have a program where they exchange the books, like between 2-3 libraries, monthly basis, weekly basis, they exchange the books among other libraries.
We do that in universities where we share access. So you can have access to different university libraries. I think we can be looking at taking that down the supply chain. Final question.
Good morning, everyone. This session is so engrossing. I think we can have this till evening also. Thank you so much. Myself, Vandana Sharma. I'm from Al Salam Community School. One incident I would like to share with all of you, which we recently have. We're having coffee mornings with the parents every 3 months. So we just finished with the session, take your comments and everything. We give them one question. We kept the Wi-Fi password on the table along with the book, which have the answer of that question. To our surprise, what happened is everyone Google it, right? So what is our approach being a parent? Okay, what should we expect from a child? They also want the easy ways, right? When we change our perception, definitely their way of thinking will be modified. Like, it's up to us. Then we had a small counseling session for the parents, and then we have told them that this can be the easier way because the answer was inside the book on the first page or something. And now we can see the change. They were a little bit feeling definitely bad. It's not of parents shaming, I feel. It is of parents educating. We're educating them to give their kids or our students or our readers a better future by just, turning one of the small habit of, we are finding the easiest way, right? If I have to drive here, I will find the shortcut. Okay, and as Miss said, it's a wonderful idea. In the US, I feel that there's a rule that if we tank full of the car, we are getting a T-shirt, right? Instead of that, if we'll get a book of our choice, that will be like a cherry on the top. So definitely it's our perspective, how we are molding our kids. And here, obviously, the problem of having lack of time with the parents and emotional bonding is definitely there. But a little, I think 5 minutes a day only, we can start with that. And definitely it's going to create huge difference. Now in my school, we have seen, after doing this practice, we have seen our year 3 students have turned from 200 hours to 333 hours, which is a huge difference. Okay. And our year 7, it's like, to my surprise, the year 7 is back. They are only on, 200 hours of reading, whereas year 3 is 333 hours. So it's like how we are going through it. So it's a common effort, and we cannot stop it. It's like we have to keep on doing that. So that was my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think like every one of those discussions, and for me, a good panel or a good moderation is where it leaves me with more questions than answers. It leaves me with lots more reflection and lots more things. Oh gosh, I've got to go and read this, or I've got to go and think about this. And ladies, you've done this in buckets. You've really got us going this morning in terms of some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, some of the maybe dark side, some of the more positive side. But definitely it is something that we all wrap around, whether we've got kids ourselves, we're surrounded with people who have children, whether we're in education or not. This is something that is affecting a whole generation, and we collectively take responsibility for it. So Ebtisam, Sandy, Nadia, thank you all very much, and thank you for having us here this morning. Thank you for your contributions and thoughts, and I wish you all the very best for the remainder of today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And indeed, you have left us with a lot to think about.